My name is Ruth England Jones. I was born in Denver at home in November 9, 1920, and I grew up there, moved up to Boulder after the war for my husband to continue school, and we've been in Boulder ever since.
You're a Coloradoan through
Yes,
and through.
Yes.
So when did you get into nurses training?
No, I was a dietitian.
You're a dietitian?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I came to college here in Boulder, 38 to 42, graduated with a home economics degree, and then I went to a University of Iowa in Iowa City for 1 year and received a master's degree in nutrition and biochemistry and a dietetic internship. I finished that in about October of 43, and the war was on in Europe, and the Army was calling for dietitians. So I thought, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I enlisted, and went in January of 44. I enlisted.
Among the people that you grew up with in high school or went to college with, did many of the women join the service, or were you kind of unusual in that this is how you decided to go through
I
the
guess
war?
I was a little unusual. There were
Could-
lots of
could you
women.
kind of start that over again, because I was kind of talking over you.
Oh.
I wanted to make sure we got
Oh, yes.
this.
I guess it was a little unusual because ever since then in groups I've been in, I was one of the only one or one of the few who were women in the service. And so there, of course, there were the whacks and the waves too, and I never met any of them. But
How'd your family feel about you becoming a nurse and going overseas?
yes, well, I'm sure they were concerned, but they supported us and wrote letters, and sent a few packages, and I had most of my pay sent home because we didn't need very much.
Your family supported you. We've
Yes.
talked to a couple of other people along the way. They were nurses that went in, and it was very shocking to their families that they would even go in and do something.
Oh, is
like
that right?
And not that they were hostile to it, but just very kind of shocked and upset that their daughter would go into a
Yeah,
situation
they were
like
concerned.
that. And it was a different. It wasn't as accepted as at that time.
Yes.
In some circles, and so, but you never had that kind of resistance.
No, my parents were very supportive.
Okay.
They were proud, and went to Fort Carson for basic training, including crawling under supposed gunfire. I don't know if it was really gunfire. And took a course in using dehydrated foods.
You mentioned that when you decided to join the military, and you were training at Fort Carson. What was training like for the women at that time? You know, how did it compare to what the men went through? And then when you were going overseas on the troop ship and everything, you must have been traveling mostly with other men. How much did they try to keep you apart from the men?
No, in basic training, we all did the calisthenics all together every day, and we did the crawling under the gunfire, and I don't know. Of course, I didn't have any combat work, but I remember when we went by to get issued our uniforms. There was a big room with tables, and we walked around, get what size the jackets and the skirts and the wraparound work dresses. And I got to the shoe table, and he said, "Well, what size?" I said, "Well, I wear a size 8 toe, a double 8 heel, and a triple A instep And he laughed and he said, "We have A, B, C, D, and E." So,
So you didn't join for the fashion experience.
no. The uniforms were very sturdy and comfortable.
Uh, did they try to keep you away from the men at all, or was there opportunities to socialize there?
No, we could socialize.
I don't know why, it surprises me that they had dietitians that specifically allocated during the war. So much of it I heard about later, where dietitians, came into our lives. And, I guess about the time TV dinners hit, that we began to think about diet and things. So how many people were really properly trained as dietitians?
Well, you had to be a registered dietitian to be in the Army, and you were an officer, and so you had studied nutrition and dietetics and kitchen management, personnel management, ordering food, quantities that you need. So you were supposedly well trained.
But it was important to have the right diet for these
Yes,
guys over there.
yes. Of course, we had to work with what we got, but they were good providers.
How sophisticated was the profession, the science, then based on, compared to what we know about it now?
Well, I'm sure we know a lot more now. A lot of scientific studies have gone on, and a lot of popular interest in eating for good health, and keeping your weight right, and getting all your vitamins and minerals and hormones. So, but it was a regular college course. Then after that, I got on a train and went to Boston, and then on a ship, Matson Line cruiser called the Mariposa, and landed in Glasgow, Scotland. And everybody on the ship, we found a sign on the ship that said that this ship is equipped to accommodate 750 passengers. We had 6,000. But it was easy. Everybody was in the same boat, and easy to talk to because we were all headed for we didn't know what, We had triple-decker bunks. There were 9 bunks in one room that probably had been for 2 people, and it was all women in the bunk room, and I was happy either standing up or either on deck or on my bunk, because I would feel nauseous if I was down under the hold, but not lying down. So I stayed up on deck, and one group tried to teach me how to play bridge. I had never played bridge, and I didn't like bridge. Felt like bridge players were kind of prejudiced, and I didn't like that. But I did learn how to play chess, and it was easy to talk to people because we were all headed for the same place in the same boat, literally.
How long were you on that?
We were on the ocean either 7 or 10 days.
Did you worry at any point about being in the convoy, the German U-boats at that time, or was that threat kind of dissipated that you know of?
Well, we were aware that it was possible, but we didn't have any close calls that I know of. And they were pretty good about keeping us informed of what was going on. Only 2 meals a day, 2 large meals a day, and there were 5 different seatings. That many people on board. So we landed in Glasgow, Scotland, got on a train and went down through Scotland, and I enjoyed seeing the rock walls that separated the farms there. And then we got down to England, We got to see some castles in Wales while we were in the staging area there near Southampton. And then D-Day plus 80, I got on a LCT and crossed the English Channel and walked up Utah Beach. And we lived in in Normandy in tents for several weeks. And then finally we got on a train and went to Bar-le-Duc, where my hospital unit, the 90th General, was set up. We were fortunate in that we had buildings. It had been a French insane asylum. And so we had the buildings for the hospital and for the officers' quarters. And they put in several tents for enlisted men's quarters. And I was there for about a year and a half.
Where was Bar-le-Duc?
It's halfway between Paris and the German border.
Okay. So you were not that far away from the front lines at
Right.
this point.
In fact, we were strafed on Christmas Eve of '44. But everybody was at a party. Nobody got hurt.
You said you were at a party at the time, so were they attacking the camp then?
Yes, they strafed the enlisted men's tents. And the bullets went through the tent. But everybody was at the party in the building. And so nobody got hurt. So that was very fortunate.
So it's important to party.
It was important to party that night, yes, definitely. Yeah, otherwise we didn't have any close brushes with danger.
Were you ever bombed at all with or artillery come
No.
close to you?
As a hospital, you weren't necessarily a military target, something that the Germans would
Right,
be after.
right,
Now, how close to the lines were you?
Well, during the Battle of the Bulge, we could even hear artillery off and on. We were probably, I don't really know how far from the action, maybe 30 or 40 miles.
What was the feeling being there and knowing that you were that close? And were you so tied up with what you were doing at work that you didn't think that much, or what were you feeling?
Well, during the Battle of the Bulge, we had that in mind, you know, that we might have to hurry up and evacuate, or we might get bombed. And well, I'm a Christian, and I was trusting God to bring me through, and He did. And we had a Catholic chaplain, and we happened to have a lovely Catholic chapel on our base. And then there were also a Protestant chaplain, Robinson, and we had services.
And that was important to an awful lot of the GIs too.
Yes,
wasn't it?
definitely.
We've heard stories about the Battle of the Bulge and how rough the weather conditions were for the soldiers there. In your situation, you didn't have to deal with as many of those kind of things, but what were the conditions like throughout the winter? I understand it was a very harsh winter in France.
Yes, I remember the fall and winter there in Normandy in northern France. Cold, gray, misty, very chilly. And the summers were beautiful, but the winter, you really needed to stay in or dress really warm. So I felt sorry for the soldiers out there in the cold, because they didn't have very much protection. No, especially the foot soldiers, I felt were the most the hardiest, because they had to be. But we did get patients, sometimes directly from the front lines, but often patients that had been through the field hospital and the station hospital, and then were sent to us for longer-term recuperation.
Was that a kind of a typical scenario that they would come off the lines, go to the aid stations, and then
Yes.
to the field hospital? And kind of describe what that process would be like for somebody who was coming out of the front lines like that.
Well, they would have been hurt, and they would have had the the paramedics pick them up and get them to the field hospital where they would get first aid and enough diagnosis to know what their problem was and what they needed. And then those were just very temporary. They didn't have very much equipment in those. Then if they needed more, they were sent on to the station hospitals, which were still mobile, and but they had more facilities. They had cots and real doctors, nurses, like MASH. And then if they still needed more after that, then they came to us. Mm-hmm.
So it was quite a process.
Quite a process, yes.
Were the guys in the field really fairly well trained to help these guys to get them to you later on?
I believe they were, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Army was very good to provide training. Mm-hmm.
Again, we see a little bit about MASH and things. You have no idea. And medics were right up in the front lines in the bitter battles, too.
Yes, I think they were, mm-hmm. Along with the soldiers. Mm-hmm.
When a patient would get back to your area, how long would they typically stay? Would they stay there and recover, or would they be moved on to somewhere else?
It depended on what they needed. I think if there was probability that they would be recover and be able to go back to their unit, that would happen. But then some were just too badly injured or mentally or physically, and they were and sent back home. Mm-hmm.
Who was making decisions on, how, say somebody was really mentally broken down at this point,
Well, it would be the doctors.
As a dietitian, what were your duties in this?
Well, our duties was to take the food that came in. The Army brought us all our food. We didn't use anything from the local areas. So it came to the hospital, and it was our job to write the menus with what we had and help the cooks figure out what to do, what to make, and we would get beef that was called R&F, roasting and frying beef, and then we also had beef that was B and S, boiling and stewing beef. And we could make up menus. We had a lot of macaroni and cheese, a lot of spaghetti, and a lot of potatoes, and tried to make healthful meals, encouraging people to eat vegetables and
Were some of these guys, when they came off the lines, were they a little malnutrition? They weren't getting much except K rations.
They were getting K rations or C rations. Now, while we were in Normandy, that's what we ate too, was K rations and C rations. They weren't too bad.
We've heard other accounts of that.
I've had C rations.
One thing I remember, they had Coca-Cola, but it wasn't chilled. Just room temperature Coca-Cola. And of course, most of the food was canned. And the eggs came in a 30-pound can, already shelled, and the cook would just take a ladle and scoop out some, and put it on the grill, make it scrambled or turn over, whatever you wanted. And we had, at one point, we had several little young German POWs working in our hospital kitchen. And we posted the menu on the wall. One day it said bread, butter, peanut butter, and they were looking at it. Butter, zwei butter.
Peanut butter wasn't one of their regular rations.
I guess they didn't know what that meant. So our let's see, Sergeant Peer was our chief cook, and then he had corporals who were under him, and then privates. And
How many people did you have to cook for each day?
I was just trying to think. I imagine maybe probably between 60 and 100.
As a dietitian, were there some challenges there just when these guys had come back wounded? Were there special things you had to do for people? Some of the wounded, they just couldn't handle the regular foods.
Yes, we would consult with them, you know, and encourage them to eat healthily. And if they were allergic to something, we tried to fix up an alternative. And they ate on trays in the mess hall.
You mentioned you didn't necessarily get food from France in the local area, but did you have any contact with the French civilian population? Did they volunteer? Did they help out around where you were?
Just about a mile and a half from our base, there was a family named Moingeon, Moingeon, who had a daughter that was about my age, Lucette, and they were very hospitable. They invited me and several others to lunch a couple of times, and they were trying to learn a little English, and I was trying to learn a little French, and so I enjoyed that. And that was the only one I met, except in Paris one time. A doctor and I were walking around just getting exercise, and we happened to stop at one corner, and a Frenchman introduced himself and invited us to his office. He was a dentist, and so we got to number 2 Rue de Rivoli was his address there. So mostly they were friendly, but we didn't really get close to them.
As the soldiers would come through, and did you have much experience dealing with them one-on-one?
Yes.
Did you get a sense of the attitude of what their situation was like once they got back to your state, your point there?
Yes, part of our dietitian's job was to try to encourage the patients and support them, and visit them, and let them know that they weren't alone and that they were appreciated, and that they were important as individuals to the war effort. And so we heard lots of stories, and there was a difference. Some of them were hopeful, and some of them were discouraged, and I think on the whole they were glad what they were doing, and felt that that was important.
Where you were there other women?
Yes, our unit had 3 dietitians. 3 dietitians, 3 physical therapists, and quite a number of nurses. I don't really remember how many, maybe 15 or 20 nurses.
With the other women that you were with there, what was their feeling about being in a combat zone, and what were you and they experiencing just being there?
Well, I don't think it was partly an adventure. It was so interesting, to be involved in something that big, and being able to travel and see other places and other people. So it was interesting as well as patriotic and useful. So we felt like we were where we belonged, and wanted to be there.
Well, that had to be such an experience. And have you run into other women that you were with in service? Do you keep in close
We
contact?
had one, another dietitian in my unit was from New York. Her name was Hilda Katz. And after the war, she came to visit. And it was very interesting because being from New York, her image of Colorado was Wild West, cowboys, ranches, and when she stepped off the plane, she looked around and she says, "Wow, you do have big buildings here, don't you?" So that was so much fun to have her come and visit.
This gave you an experience of meeting people from different parts of the country that you never would have known before.
Yes, our unit had a very nice doctor from Philadelphia that I enjoyed visiting with. And also, one of our patients was an opera singer. His name was, Paul Vazganian. He was from New York, and he serenaded me several times. Pretty exciting. Yeah.
That doesn't happen to many people.
No. No, he had a beautiful voice, and he was a patient in our hospital for a while, but he got cured and went back to work. So.
This is something I think people from my generation later were used to people being mobile and going to other parts of the country and meeting people from different parts of the country. In World War II or before the war, that wasn't necessarily the case. You didn't meet people from New York as readily. And
No.
people from back there didn't come out here.
That's true. Well, I was fortunate in growing up in a family. My dad was interested in seeing more of the West, so we took many trips all over the West growing up, but I had never been back east before.
You had a boyfriend that you were keeping in contact with during the war.
Yeah.
Well, explain that.
Well, we were both in the service, and we went to the same high school, but I didn't know him in high school because we had a class of 500. But I met him at a youth group in Beth Eden Baptist Church in Denver. And so we dated some there, and then we both entered the service and corresponded all the time during the service and got married when we both got home. So that was fun.
What was his name and what did he end up doing?
His name was Bob Jones, and he ended up being the radar technician on a Navy airplane. And so he had some interesting times. You know, remember the Howard Hughes airplane? It had crashed, or was on the water out in the ocean, and his unit went out to repair it. And so he got to climb inside that Howard Hughes airplane, and they got it fixed up to take off again. That was the most exciting part of his tour. Mostly he was stationed in California, and they did forays out, patrolling and checking on safety. So that was nice.
But he had trouble kind of sending letters to you because you kept moving.
I kept moving, yes,
After the bulge and the Army was moving on into Germany for the last 6 months or so of the war, you stayed pretty much in the same place then? You didn't follow?
Right. There was talk of sending us on over to the Pacific Theater after D-Day and everything was slowing down. But I guess then the war in Japan was also nearing a close.
Do you remember what you were doing on VE Day?
There was a parade in Barley Duke. Oh, VE Day. Victory in Europe. Well, I don't have any specific memories of it, but I'm sure we were celebrating. Yeah.
How long were you over there?
Almost 2 years. I went in January of '44 and got home in November of '45. And when the war was over, I got to go to Switzerland for 1 week and to the Riviera for 1 week. So that was wonderful. to go to the Riviera, I rode in the cargo of a plane, in a cargo plane, sitting on boxes in the back. But I still have a straw hat that says Juan Le Pen from the Riviera.
I'm trying to remember who it was. I can't remember the name offhand, but somebody we talked to for the American Memory Show, he flew cargo missions, and one of the things he did is, after the war, he would fly the brass down to the Riviera in C-46s or C-47s.
Right.
So, I don't know, maybe you rode with him.
I have.
He wasn't the only one.
One
but,
of those.
But that was apparently a common thing after the war
Yes.
was over, that
Yeah.
they took people down to
Right.
R&R.
Sometimes it is a small world.
It is, yeah.
But,
And then Switzerland was interesting. We got to go in an inside tunnel up the mountain. I fell in love with Switzerland. It was so gorgeous. The mountains were not as high altitude as our Rockies, but they seemed higher because they started lower. We started more near. Yeah, that was by train, and we stayed in, what is that word? Chateaus. And got to hear yodeling, and got to ride up in the train inside this tunnel and stop and get out and look out several times. Mont Saint-Michel, I believe, is the one that this tunnel was in. So that was very interesting.
When you were growing up in Denver, did you ever think you'd ever have a chance to visit places like this?
No. No.
Have you,
No, go ahead.
have you traveled since, once you got back?
My daughter-in-law and I took a trip to Norway and Sweden and Denmark about 10 years ago, which was interesting. I got to see my ancestors' family farm in northern Denmark, and that was very interesting.
So you still got a little chance to venture out and see part of the world.
Yes, And we stopped in a little cafe, and she said she was trying to learn Danish, and so she ordered a soda in Danish, and the clerk said, yes, and do you want me to open it for you in English? So that was pretty.
So what did you do after the war?
Well, let's see, I came back home, and 45, then I started working at the university, a dormitory food service. Then got married, and still continued working there and teaching some home economics classes. And then by that time, my husband and I had 2 daughters, 5 and 3, and I thought, what a rat race to get up in the morning, take your children to preschool, go to work, come home. I'm just not home enough, so what can I do that I could work and still be home? And so I thought, well, I could maybe take care of some other children. So we thought about that, and my dad loaned us $7,000 to buy a lot, and help build a building. So we built an L-shaped building so we could live in one end of it and have this preschool in the other end of it. And so we started that in 1954 and ran it 45 years. We must have had 10,000 children go through there, and it was called Jack and Jill. And I have so many good memories there. We had wonderful teachers, and my husband was so good about building toys and equipment and keeping everything running. He built, on the playground, he built a slide and a swing, and he took off the steel bed of a slide because the children would put sand and slide down with the sand and cut the metal. So he took off the flat metal and put on conduit pipes, so the sun couldn't couldn't burn the kids, and the water couldn't stay on there. And he built a helicopter and a big sand pile and a merry-go-round and a boat. So we had lots of fun. And
What was Boulder like right after the war?
I think it was about 30,000 and growing. And it was a good place.
Were there a lot of ex-GIs coming in and going to the university at that point?
Yes, because we had the GI Bill. Yeah, my husband went back to school. He hadn't graduated before. And so they had student housing in the expansible trailers. We lived in one of those for a couple of years. And then we moved into a Quonset hut where I had less storage space in my kitchen than I had in the trailer. And and then finally when we built our preschool, of course, we moved there.
You probably had some of the GI's children in your schools.
Oh, yes. Yes. And when I turned 90 last November, my two daughters came and had a big party for me. And many of the people that came to the party had seen her little ad in the paper with my picture that said, "Ruth Jones is 90." And so a lot of them had been children that had gone to my preschool. So that was so exciting.
What a tremendous birthday then.
Have you ever had any contact with any women who may be performing similar duties in the military today? Or just have any contact with anybody that is serving now as a woman in the military?
No, I don't.
We know that they're filling a lot more roles than were available to you at the time, but we were just wondering if you had any experiences being able to let the people today know what your situation was like.
Well, the ladies at my church asked me to give a talk about my experiences there, and they were very interested in the role of the women in the military. But we have to appreciate our government and our military. They are important.
You know, I look at so many of our veterans. We've interviewed so many World War II veterans over the years. And I'm younger than most, but I still remember when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, going into high school and out, that people didn't live beyond 65 or much longer than that. Yet everything that these veterans went through, the guys that were around at the Battle of the Bulge, the cold, everything they went through, so many are living to 80s and 90s.
Right.
Did they learn something? Did diet change for the people that came back? Did things change over the years?
Well, part of living long I think, is your emotions and your physique and your outlook on life has a lot to do with how long and how well you live. And whether eating in the Army had that much influence on them, I really couldn't say. But we tried to do our part when they were there.
Most of this probably would have happened after they came back, and things that were changing.
Yes, because there's so much emphasis now on good health.
What memories do you come away from the war and the experience? What do you remember?
Well, I remember with pleasure feeling that I did my part for the war effort and for our country, and also personally the experiences I've had that maybe broadened my feeling of that we're all one here and we need to treat each other properly have good values, and work toward peace and understanding